Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Tartalo 9th edition International Conference on Myth in the Arts here in Vitoria-Gasteiz. My name is Adrián Arana, and I have the pleasure of chairing this panel. So, in this session, we will explore how myth continues to shape contemporary narratives and visual culture through two fascinating presentations that engage with film, archetypes, and classical reception. Each speaker will have around 15-20 minutes for their presentation, and then we will have a shared question and session at the end. So we kindly ask you to hold your questions until the talks are over to distribute accordingly the time. So our first speaker was Dr. Marta Miquel Valdellú, but unfortunately she has not been able to be with us today due to personal reasons, but she has very kindly recorded her session, so you will have it on the Tartalo webpage afterwards if you are interested on her session. So, having said this, our first speaker today will be Claudia Fernández Estrada. She holds a bachelor's degree in English Studies and a master's degree in Advanced English Studies from the University of Santiago de Compostela, where she is currently pursuing a PhD under the supervision of Professors Cristina Murón Figueroa and Manuela Palacios González. Her primary research interests lie in Arthurian and medieval studies with a growing focus on eco-criticism. Over the course of her academic career, she has received several scholarships, including the Fundación Amancio Ortega, and most recently, the Collaboration Scholarship for the Spanish Ministry. And this latest award enabled her to collaborate with the Department of English and German Studies at the Faculty of Philology of the University of Santiago de Compostela. And she will be delivering a presentation titled Greening Camelot, Eco-Critical Insights into John Burman's Excalibur. So whenever you want, Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah.
Today, I am going to be talking about my sort of eco-critical approach to the film by John Burman, Excalibur. So I chose this film for this type of analysis for a couple of reasons. First, because it presents a very comprehensive narrative in the sense that it very nicely depicts the whole of the Arthurian legend, and it depicts the rise, the splendor, and the fall of Arthur in a very clear way. Sometimes it may even look like there's three big chunks glued together, but it tells us the whole story, so it's great. Then the main reason why I chose to, again, carry out this type of eco-critical approach, it's because it is situated in a time of transition between the pagan past and the emerging Christian future. Or as Muriel Whittaker said, it tells us how the world of pristine nature is modified by the emerging world of man. So we have these two worldviews coexisting together. And even director John Burman said that for him, this is a story about civilization. It's a story about the twilight of the gods. That is how those gods of this pre-Christian past of supposed, let's say, unity and peace with nature are fading. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And the other reason is that it exalts the theme of union between land and king that is already present in Arthurian Grail narratives. This is actually the main focus of the whole movie, and we're going to see how this union is, I argue, depicted in a physical way as well as a spiritual way, and I will get into that in a little bit. So the main objective is obviously to assess the portrayal of the relationships between nature and civilization. And I'm going to try to unveil an ecological discourse of union that rejects binary opposites. We're going to be talking about pre-Christian notions of oneness, as well as Christian concepts of morality and self-restraint. Okay, so as I was saying, these are the objectives, and we're going to move on to the analysis. Now, I have structured the analysis into 3 parts, following that tripartite structure that I was talking about at the beginning. And the actual analysis is more thorough, but because of time limits, I had to just mention just a couple of things. So hopefully they make sense. So we're going to start at the beginning. If you have watched the movie, you know that this is the time of the interregnum period. This is the time before Arthur. This is the time before and during Uther Pendragon. Now, in case you're not familiar with the legend, Uther Pendragon is going to be Arthur's father. So we don't have Arthur here just yet. And as you can see, there seems to be a war going on, right? And it's dark, and we can infer that it's winter because the trees don't have foliage, and the land is on fire. Now, when I put my, let's say, eco-critical glasses on, I can't help but notice how the fact that the forest is on fire testifies to how man's destructiveness impacts the land. So in creating a war against themselves, they are also creating a war against nature. And then we have Merlin, and Merlin is going to be our guide and our mentor. He is this pagan figure of the past, and he's going to present Uther with the sword of power, Excalibur. And he's going to voice this, I think, pretty ecocentric discourse when he talks about the sword's origins. He's going to tell Uther that Excalibur was forged in a time when bird and beast and flower were one with man. He's talking about this notion of oneness, this ideal, I would say, notion of oneness and of unity. And he goes on to say that with the sword, there's going to be a union between man and nature. He's going to tell Uther, you will be the land, and the land will be you. If you fail, the land will perish, and as you thrive, the land will blossom. So there is this great connection between the land and king that is enabled by the sword. So the sword is, let's say, the object, this almost magical object that allows the king to become one with nature. And this is the physical union that I was talking about. And in fact, we are told that Excalibur's power is meant to heal, not to hack, which is, in my opinion, a little bit questionable, considering that it is, after all, a weapon for division and conquest. But nevertheless, the discourse is there. So, Uther is king, and you would think, okay, he has unified the kingdoms, everything is perfect, except he is not. It is not. It is not perfect. Uther is a very, we could say, simple individual. He is driven by a mindset of patriarchal domination. For him, everything is about the self versus the other. And those who are labeled as others suffer the consequences. A very important example of this is the rape of Igraine. Now, again, if you're familiar with the legend, you know that Igraine is going to be eventually Arthur's mother. But Igraine, she was already married to the Duke of Gorlois, But Uther decided he had to have her. And with the aid of Merlin, which is again something I think a little bit questionable as well, but with the aid of Merlin's magic, Uther is transformed into Gorlois and he goes to Igraine's chambers and essentially he rapes her. Now, if you have watched the movie, you probably remember the scene. It is quite brutal. It's very explicit. It's very visual, very, I don't know. When I watched it, I was actually baffled because Uther is fully dressed in armor, not even natural clothing, in armor. And by contrast, Igraine is fully naked. So then again, if I put on my eco-critical, eco-feminist glasses, I can't help but notice this relationship between Igraine and the land itself. Obviously, Igraine is represented in her most natural state, and she's been assaulted by Uther's patriarchal force, just like the land. The forest on fire suffer the consequences of men's war. But nevertheless, Arthur is conceived here. So this is good because we get our hero. And Merlin is happy about that. And he quite literally comes to collect baby Arthur. And he tells Uther, well, you betrayed the Duke. You stole his wife. You did this. You did that. You are not the one, Uther. Merlin is, in my view, disclosing a very distinct Christian morality here because he's talking about deadly sins. And if we look at Uther's character, it's just the deadly sin of lust, wrath, pride, all of that. So essentially, we're told that even though he has this sword of power, he is a spiritually imbalanced individual, and he is therefore not the one. But then we have Arthur, and Arthur is supposed to be the chosen one. So we fast forward. Arthur pulls the sword from the stone, and at first the knights are not quite happy about this, so they go after him, and Arthur runs and hides into the forest. And in the forest, he is scared at the sight of an owl, a centipede, and a lizard. And Merlin comes in and he talks about the dragon. Now, the dragon is actually a symbol that is present, very much present throughout the whole of the movie. And it comes to symbolize basically the earth. And Merlin tells Arthur, don't worry, the dragon, it is everywhere. It is everything. It is the bark of trees. It is lightning. So relax and just sleep and rest in the arms of the dragon. Remember, Arthur is in the forest, right? So Merlin is telling Arthur to relax, to not be scared, because him, like the owl, like the lizard, and like the centipede, he is part of this natural world, right? He is part of this web of interconnections. So ideally, the idea here is that Arthur has to learn that his role as a king is not about ruling over the land, like his father had attempted to do, but about coexisting with it. Is Arthur going to understand this? We will see. We fast forward again, and Arthur encounters Lancelot, and Lancelot appears as this perfect, undefeated knight, and Arthur doesn't like that one bit. So he challenges Lancelot, the sword breaks, and that's a problem, because again, a king without a sword, a land without a king. But Arthur has a sort of awakening, and he says, oh, it's my pride that broke it. So again, we have the deadly sin of pride. We have Christian morality creeping in again. And because he has this sort of awakening, the Lady of the Lake comes in, and she's very benevolent, and she restores Excalibur and gives Arthur a second chance. So then we are presented with Camelot as being absolutely perfect. Visually, this is a very bucolic scenario. We have springs, flowers, very bright and vibrant colors. We are made to believe that this is Arthur's perfect kingdom and he's a perfect king. Except, in my view, it is an illusion. Because there is a very short scene, a little bit before this one right here, and right after, let's say, Arthur's supposed awakening, which is actually when the Round Table is created. And there is a war going on, there's a battle going on. And again, it is nighttime, and the dialogue is absolutely brutal. One of the knights says, "We slaughtered every single one of them, but let one of them live so that he would tell the others what fate awaits them at the hands of you." This is absolutely brutal. And if we compare that scene to the opening scene with the forest on fire, I couldn't help but notice the similarities. So actually, Arthur's method of establishing peace unquestionably mirrors that of his father's. So is this really so perfect? I say no. And the fact that that Camelot is meant to fall is proof to that, I think. When Arthur sees Lancelot and Guinevere, he's going to become deeply enraged, and he's going to relinquish Excalibur. And we move to the last part, and I'll be very quick, which is the Grail quest. The movie does something which I think is brilliant, which is to conflate the figure of Arthur with the Fisher King. Arthur is disabled, he has descended into sin, and he doesn't have the sword. So Camelot becomes the wasteland. This last part is where interdependence between the health of the king and the health of the land is more explicit. And Arthur tells his knights to find the Grail, because only the Grail can redeem them. And when Percival, our Grail Knight, is about to attain the Grail, the Grail shifts into an image of Arthur constantly. So it's always Arthur and the Grail, Arthur and the Grail. So I took this as Arthur is both, on the one hand, the disabled king, but on the other hand, he is the Grail king. And as the Grail king, he becomes this sort of transcorporeal subject, and he relinquishes mastery, because in this moment with the Grail, he understands that he is part of this web of interconnections that Merlin has been talking about. And in this sense, the quest becomes the spiritual awakening that precedes ecological awakening. Now, after this, if you watch the movie, you probably remember the last part where Arthur is riding into battle again, and the land is quite literally regenerating along with him. But then Arthur dies, so I don't know what that means. Perhaps that this brief moment of awakening is meant to disappear. I don't know. But just to finish, I think that there is definitely an ecological discourse present. Now, I don't think the goal of the movie was to promote, an ecological discourse, but I do think that it is there. But it is also there in theory, because in practice, it is very different. And there are a lot of paradoxes and a lot of contradictions, like a weapon's power to heal, or the fact that Camelot is depicted as this perfect kingdom, this perfectly balanced kingdom, but in reality, it was established after brutal conquest. And perhaps the biggest paradox is the yearning for union with nature that Merlin seems to represent, and the inevitable rise of a hierarchical society that is deeply estranged from it. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much to both speakers. We now have around 15 minutes for questions and answers. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and I'll call on you. Yeah. Let's see if we have an online question as well. Okay.
Hi, those were two really lovely presentations, and I had a question for Claudia, if she's still around. I was wondering, while listening to your talk about, Arthurian myth and Arthurian adaptations into film, if you think that this eco-critical approach is something that has survived along the ages, because I was thinking about the recent adaptation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and how it also deals with all these elements of, nature, how it interrelates to Gawain's whole journey into masculinity and etc. And yeah, I just was wondering if you had any thoughts about it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for your question. So I know the film. I haven't watched, I think I've only watched the beginning, like first 15 minutes. But I actually, before getting into Excalibur, I thought about that movie, but I never got to watch it, so I was like, no. But yes, definitely. I think, I think eco-criticism as a discipline is definitely attracting a lot of attention right now. And I think when it comes to medieval studies or films set in a sort of Middle Ages, like, for example, Arthurian films, Middle Dark Ages, I think it's still very new, but I think there's definitely a lot to explore, especially with Sir Gawain. I don't typically do films. Actually, this is quite out of my comfort zone. So I don't know if there's anyone out there working on, for example, the film of Sir Gawain. But I do know that there are people, myself included, working on, Arthurian studies from the literature perspective, like literary Arthurian studies from an eco-critical perspective, because I think Sir Gawain is one of them, but we have, many others. The fact that Merlin is, sometimes this pagan conjurer, then sometimes he's the son of the devil, and I think there is a lot to unpack there. But yes, definitely, film is a good way to do it because it's very visual. So it stands out. And one of the things that stood out the most to me with this film is the green hue of the film. If you've watched the film, there's always this green thing. Whenever you pull the sword, there's always like this green color there. So the association is there, as I see it. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any other question? If not, I have one last question for Claudia Fernandez. You have analyzed Excalibur from this eco-critical perspective. I was wondering, regarding myth and the dragon and so on, have you considered analyzing this narrative also from the animal studies perspective? You've mentioned this idea that dragons represent coexistence, while humans tend to oppress, to rule over. So do you think that we could consider this narrative being anti-speciesist? Thank you.
That is a great question. And actually, I have considered animal studies, but I'm also kind of entering that area, so I'm not, an expert. The way I see the dragon is very interesting because typically when you're talking about medieval stories, a dragon is kind of like the devil, right? It's meant to represent evil, and here, as I see it, it's the opposite. From this eco-critical perspective, it's the earth, it's nature, and according to what Merlin says, nature is good. Now, as for it being a species, I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't know. I have to think about it, but it's a great question because I haven't thought about it from that perspective. Do you have any thoughts?
I think that I'm not an expert on this, but I would definitely consider this idea of at least of considering this narrative being post-human, or this idea of transcendence of nature over humans. But as mentioned, it is not my field of study, so I was just giving you some thoughts on that. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a great question, so thank you.
All right, so I'm afraid we have reached the end of our session. Thank you very much to both speakers for such an excellent presentations and for all your attention and participation. So please join me in giving them a final round of applause. So enjoy the rest of the Tartalo conference. Thank you.